So, anxiety, that can be a real bummer. And that's what we're going to talk about today. I have talked about my struggle with anxiety before. It's not chronic or anything like that, but let me tell you, I have a new appreciation and understanding for people that struggle with chronic anxiety. And it's not just anxiety. There's a lot of other issues that a lot of Christians deal with every single day. But you know what's difficult about dealing with mental health as a Christian is that sometimes it's ignored. Sometimes it's explained away. And there's a lot of different ways that we're told how to deal with this. Maybe it's read your Bible more. Maybe it's pray harder. Maybe it's you have a demon and you need to go to a deliverance minister. Don't do that. Don't do that. Maybe there's trauma that happened to you that you have to deal with in a real way. Maybe we're making life choices that aren't healthy and are contributing to our bad mental health. Whatever the case is, I want to talk about it today. And I invited my friend Ash on today to talk about it. The reason why I asked her is because she's been very helpful in giving me very practical and biblical advice on mental health. It's like free therapy. Sorry, Ash. But it's true. She's been through a lot herself that has brought her to where she's at today. And just a heads up, she is going to be sharing some personal things that happened to her in her childhood. It is a sensitive topic, so I did want to give everybody a heads up on that. We discuss anxiety and other peripheral mental health issues in light of scripture, in light of secular society, the self-help movement, and much more. This won't be the last time I talk about this topic. I do plan on having my friend Jeremiah Johnston on to talk about this as well, so keep a lookout for that. As always, be sure to check out the description. Ash has her own YouTube channel called Bible Show and Tell. It's really cool, very unique. She goes out to different places, thrift stores, to find old Bibles, to see what's in them. What are the notes? Who was this person that had this Bible? And she also does interviews on her channel, including mine. I've been on her channel as well, talking about our Bibles. What's in our Bible? What does it look like? Where did that tear come from? Why did you highlight this passage? And it's really cool, really unique. So be sure to check out her channel. In the meantime, I hope that this interview blesses you. Ash, thank you so much for coming on today.
Thank you for having me, Melissa. I'm really excited to be here.
Tell us a little bit about who you are and what you do.
Absolutely. So my name's Ashley. I go by Ash. I'm a wife of almost 8 years now, and I have 3 children who have bottomless energy and keep me on my toes all of the time. I'm from Florida originally, but now living in coastal Mississippi and loving it here.
Yeah. And that's, I've never been to Mississippi for too long because I don't like getting eaten by mosquitoes and water in the air. So yeah, it attacks you. But yeah, so let's go ahead and segue into today's topic, because this is something that you and I, we have talked behind the scenes maybe for about a year about anxiety. And this is something incredibly personal for you specifically. You wear many hats. You do a lot of different things, and I want you to share as much as you are comfortable with your background and struggle with PTSD and anxiety.
Yeah, so I was not raised in a Christian home. And as a young child, I was the victim of pretty severe sexual abuse. And as a teen, I was diagnosed with post-traumatic stress disorder, PTSD, generalized anxiety disorder, GAD, and panic disorder, PD. So that's a lot of disorders right there. But many times people who experience trauma, they feel like their sense of control was taken away from them. And they often look for other ways to feel like they can regain that control. And for me, that was through occultism. And I had this white knuckle grip on my illusion of control. And it affected me so severely, Melissa. I couldn't hold a job for very long because I was having panic attacks so frequently, just falling to the ground, debilitated, felt like I was dying. I genuinely didn't connect it to anxiety at the time. I thought that there was something physiological that was happening in my body, and I thought I was dying. And so I was having all these panic attacks, and then it got to the point where I would have to pull over on the side of the road while I was driving because they would come on so frequently. And I eventually became afraid to leave my house because it was like this vicious cycle of when am I going to have the next panic attack? And that induces another one. And it's like you are just a slave to this fear. And eventually it got to a point where I was put on a benzodiazepine called Klonopin, which is a controlled substance. And I was on it 3 times a day just to keep me functioning, is what my doctor said. And it was really difficult being on that medication because benzodiazepines are very addictive. And so it became another point of anxiety for me. And I was told through the clinical setting I was in a therapist's office for multiple times a week for years. And they told me that I would never be able to heal from it. I would only be able to cope with PTSD. I would never not have it. I would never be able to function without the medication. And so that was really disheartening, and it was really something that hindered healing for me for a long time. And so when Jesus came into my life and saved me, he helped me slowly over the years release that grip I had on this illusion of control in my life. And he showed me to focus on trust. He gave me hope that healing was possible and how to accept this fallen world as it is and learn how to suffer well.
Yes, all of that. And there's so much in between that as well. You and I have talked in great depth about your specific struggles with this and the stories that you would tell me about just not even being able to leave the house. And there was something about your story that really resonated with me because it's been, again, instrumental in helping me work through my own anxiety. And what stuck out to me is that, I mean, I've gone to therapy. I've read some books that were actually pretty good that helped me understand the why. But one of the things that really kind of helped me push through it was the practical advice that you gave me. So with that being said, with the struggles that you had and being told, hey, you're just gonna have to deal with this, what were some of the things that you did that really helped you get through your anxiety and realize, oh, I can do this?
That's a great question. And first, I want to preface this with saying I'm not coming to this conversation from any point of authority. I don't have any diplomas. I'm not a therapist. I'm not a counselor. I did go to Trinity College of the Bible Theological Seminary, and I did get a certificate in biblical counseling, which really helped a lot. So I'm not coming to this from, a diploma perspective. I'm coming from an experience perspective. And I think that from the years I had in clinical therapy, I mean, years and years, multiple times a week of it, and then shifting to a different side and a more practical side that seemed to help me, I feel like I can bring a good balanced view to this conversation. So I think what was the most instrumental thing that helped me in a practical sense was believing and understanding that healing is possible. It's very possible. And that PTSD and anxiety is not a death sentence of something that you can just never escape. And the thing about fear and anxiety is it makes you feel like you're trapped and you can't escape and you are just out of control, and which makes it worse, right? So for me, it was understanding that the cycle could be broken and there was things that were that I was responsible for in that journey.
Yeah, and then taking ownership of that. So, a preliminary question is, what is anxiety exactly?
Anxiety is, so how I would define it would be, anxiety is like fear, essentially. It's dread, it's excessive worrying, and everybody deals with anxiety to some degree, but sometimes for some of us who've gone through trauma or for other reasons, we have that more excessive form of it where it becomes debilitating in your life. It's interrupting how you're living your life. You can't live a normal life for the most part because of this fear, this dread. And a lot of times it's based in a fear of letting go of control of your life. A lot of times it's also based in a fear of death. And the reason I know that is because talking to many people on this topic, just in my personal life, I'll ask them, what are you afraid of? And they'll tell me. And I say, okay, well, what's the worst thing that could happen? And eventually you get to, I die. And that fear underneath it all is for a lot of people is this fear of death. And so there are many things that can cause anxiety, but ultimately it's just being afraid and having a difficult time trusting anybody else to handle any situation. You feel like the weight of the world is on your shoulders, and that for life to go well, you have to be micromanaging every aspect of it, which for people of faith is definitely a huge obstacle in growing closer to the Lord. Because what my walk with Jesus has looked like is him slowly releasing that grip and showing me that he's trustworthy. And even though these difficult, traumatic things have happened, that he's still trustworthy and he's still good, and I can relinquish that.
Anxiety is like a source of fear and panic. I remember my first panic attack. I didn't really know what was happening either. And it felt, and the way that I explain it to you, it's like you're almost like you're stuck in mud and you can't get out. Like your mind cannot get out of it. And it's terror, it's fear. I remember thinking at the time, this is what hell must feel like. It's just this complete divorce of anything that's loving or grounded in what's going on around you in reality. Everything looks bad. Everything looks like the bad guy. And it's just so hard to pull yourself out of that. And one thing that you explained to me is that that's your mind trying to protect you. And I learned also that there's like two kinds of anxiety. I don't have chronic anxiety. I don't have anxiety that gets triggered. Like I don't smell something or see something or hear anything that triggers anxiety. I work myself up. It's like a cerebral anxiety. It's something that I live in the future. If I have something that's going on, or something's going on with my kids, whatever it is, it's like I think about it, and it's not really like an excessive worry. It's a control, right? It's wanting to know how that's going to pan out, how that's going to happen. Living in the future, you'll have anxiety. Living in the past, you'll have depression, I've heard. And so there's these two kinds. But ultimately, one thing that you taught me is that it's a protective mechanism. Can you talk about that a little bit more?
Absolutely. So something that helped me in a practical way with anxiety in general was understanding that it's so easy to get angry at the anxiety and be like, you're ruining my life. This part of my brain is horrible. Like, why are you the absolute worst?
Yes.
And reframing it and seeing something really bad happen to me, or there's some valid fear or valid concern for most of the time. Something really bad happened and my brain doesn't want that to happen again. It's like, we're not doing that again. No, thank you. No, thanks. Hard pass. So, trying to understand and say, okay, the thing with anxiety is that fears in the mind, they create like a chain reaction almost, where you start having these physical symptoms, right? Maybe your heart rate increases. You start breathing more shallow. You might get lightheaded, right? So there's all these things that happen that are triggered by your brain, your mind trying to, keep you safe. And so what was instrumental for me was actually embracing that, because the paradoxical thing with anxiety is the more you try to suppress it and the more you try to run away from it, the bigger it becomes. That monster becomes bigger. And so it's kind of like when you're trying to put a lid on a boiling pot that's just bubbling over, and you're like, I don't want this to bubble over. So you keep trying to suppress it, and it just gets more powerful and more pressure built up in it. So is anxiety. And that's the thing, is that the only way through anxiety is head-on addressing it. And this kind of gets to the conversation about medications, because I was on medications 3 times a day. And there was a time where that was extremely helpful for me to get me through the short term. But over the years, I realized like that bubbling pot that's happening within me is not stopping. All this medication is doing is kind of like helping those symptoms. But there was lots of real things that I had to address. And so when I did that, when those things were addressed, which I'm sure we'll talk about in a little bit here, but when I faced the anxiety and those fears head on and was very honest before the Lord about them. I had times, Melissa, where I'll be honest with you, I was so bold and frank with the Lord, just in tears, and saying, like, I don't know if I trust you fully. I'm afraid. Why did these things happen to me? And I was just very in a vulnerable place in front of the Lord and just said, Lord, I don't know what it looks like or feels like to fully trust you, but I want that. I'm not going to pretend I'm there yet, but I want that.
So good.
And the prayer that I've prayed the most in my life has been for faith. I've prayed for faithfulness and faith in his promises, because for me, suffering well means clinging to the promises of God and clinging to the promise that I will have the peace that surpasses all understanding. That doesn't make any sense. And so I know that it's true, because as the Lord has increased my faith and helped me on this journey, right now, this day, have not taken any anxiety medication in 8 years. I flushed those pills 8 years ago when the Lord met me there. And it was a long journey to get there. I'm not telling anyone to do that, but I'm just saying what happened for me was I have been in a place where the doctors told me was not possible. They told me, you will be on this medication the rest of your life. You will not ever be able to function without it. And the Lord has done that in me in a supernatural way that I believe is possible for everyone else, because it was possible for me. And the Lord is faithful. And that is what is healing, is understanding that healing is possible. And kind of to give an illustration, I use this illustration with lots of people. So let's take an arm, for example. If you have an arm, right, like this one, that's never had any trauma happen to it, nothing traumatic, it looks normal. Now, if something traumatic happens to this arm, say an animal mauls it, or I get into a horrible accident, right, it's going to look grotesque, it's going to look bad. And our first reaction is going to be like, I don't want to look at it, someone else look at it for me, right? Please help me, I need help, right?
Just do it. Do it. Yeah.
Exactly. That would be me. I can't look at it. The expectation with when I say healing, it doesn't mean that my arm is going to look like nothing traumatic has ever happened to it. It's not going to look like this. There will be a scar there. The right expectation with healing is understanding that we will have a scar, but that does not mean that we are not healed. So what I mean by this is that, so something traumatic happens, we're going to have this open wound that is probably infected, and there might be, debris in it. There might be broken bones, okay? So healing looks like, with anxiety, being very honest with what's happened to you and looking at it and getting x-rays done and getting tests done and being like, okay, what is the real situation that's going on here? Okay. And then once that's done, we need to address it and say, these are the things that we need to help this. And if you stop digging through it and you stop reopening it, it eventually is going to heal up into a scar. And that is still healing. So sometimes people with anxiety, they think that with PTSD or generalized anxiety or panic disorders and these things, they think like, I should have the expectation that I will have no residual anything from what has happened to me, or I will never think of it again. It'll be as if it never happened. And that's not correct expectation management. We need to understand that healing is possible, and understanding that there is a scenario where we don't live our life with an open wound that is open forever.
Yes, there's so many questions to go into about this, because I want to get into your journey there with therapy, because it's almost like the way that you explain it to me is you'd go to therapy or you'd go to get help, and it was like the wound was always open.
Yeah.
There was never a sense of, okay, how do we close this wound? Or it's reopened. Well, tell me about that. How do you feel? And that's why I wanted to talk to you, because the way that you specifically talked about your anxiety, I've never heard anybody talk about like that before. It was just so practical and helpful. But let's back up a second. So first of all, thank you for sharing about that a very personal story about your childhood, your trauma, because stories are sacred, and once it's out there, everybody knows, right? I mean, everybody knows about this very personal thing that happened to you. And I know that takes bravery and kind of putting yourself out there. So thank you for sharing that. If somebody like you who has been able to work through that, being ostracized by your family, going through that personally, having intense anxiety, PTSD, and you're where you're at now, tells me that people watching, you can do it too, right?
Yes.
Okay. Talk more about that. Share however much you're comfortable sharing, but can you tell me more about this aspect of your journey and how you got to where you're at today?
Yes. So you did touch on something, that the sexual abuse that happened to me was by a family member, and which is very common, unfortunately. Lots of times it's people in extended family or family members. And the news of that coming out, because I didn't tell about it. Well, I tried telling, but I didn't really more publicly talk about it in my family until I was a teenager. And that really split the family in half. I did have a lot of support, thankfully, in the beginning, but certain things transpired where the person who committed the abuse to me, hold on, let me rephrase that. Let's take that out. The person who sexually abused me ended up committing suicide. And that was the turning point where I had lots of, I would say, anger, I would say resentment towards me, because some people did blame me for that. And so I went from having this trauma that happened to me to having lots of just hatred as well from parts of my family, not all of my family. And it really made it a complex issue. It really made it very difficult to navigate. And to this day, there are relationships that are forever, they're just forever different because of what has happened. And so for me, not being raised in a Christian home, not knowing the Lord, and going through this and feeling completely isolated from most of my family, and from any sense of love or worthiness or understanding of what it means to be healed, I was in therapy. And that was what I was putting all the eggs were in that basket for me, was this is it. And I was being told, you're never going to heal. You're never going to be able to function without 3 times a day benzodiazepines. They explained this to me. I was told by a clinical therapist that having PTSD is like a smoke alarm in a house that is broken, and it just goes off all the time when it doesn't need to.
Yeah.
And so I was told that I was broken, and that I actually flat out asked him, I said, is there any chance of me being able to function like a normal smoke alarm? And he said, no, there's not. And I believed it for a little bit, but then when I read through the Bible for the first time and was becoming closer to, when I was walking closer with Jesus, I saw so much healing, not from like humanity's power, but from the Lord's power. And I saw him transform people. And I thought, if he can do these things for other people, he can do that for me too. And so it was really acknowledging, like I had mentioned before the Lord, like, how can I fully trust you? I read here that I need to trust you with everything in this Bible, but how can I do that? It was a lot of wrestling and struggling with the Lord on the idea of control. And I remember praying prayers and just being like, Lord, I want to trust you, but I'm afraid. I'm so scared. What does it look like? What does it mean to fully trust you? And I would play all these scenarios in my head, like, what if I get a terminal form of cancer tomorrow? What does that look like with my trust in the Lord? What if, this happens or that happens? And playing all these what if games is something that people with anxiety tend to do a lot, right? We want to like run every case scenario and see how that's going to look. But it didn't really come to a turning point for me with my anxiety until one day I just fell before the Lord in prayer and said, Lord, I have to acknowledge at some point that everything that does come into my life is not a surprise to you. And I have to acknowledge that you are sovereign and you know everything that's going to happen in the future. And there's nothing that's going to affect me in my life or come into my life that you are not going to walk through me with. And something that brought me great comfort was in Psalm 23, we see that the Lord is our shepherd, and he leads us beside still waters into these green pastures, and he restores us. However, he also leads us through the valley of the shadow of death. And for me, I felt like, I'm good, I don't want to go there, please, no thank you. And I was actually speaking to someone close to me in my life years ago, and I was having this conversation with her, and I actually said out loud, I said, why me? And she said, why not you? Are you immune from all of the bad things in life? Should bad things happen to everybody else except for you? And it was such a gut punch, but I needed to hear it. Why not me? That's a really good question. And that helped me when I was thinking about Psalm 23, that the Lord does not promise us that a relationship with him looks like always being in green pastures. It looks like there are times of that, but there are also times of walking through the valley of the shadow of death. However, those promises that I cling to is that he will be there with me and he will comfort me. And so that changed a lot for me. It changed how I looked at suffering. And instead of everything's happening to me and I'm just a victim of life, it was understanding through a biblical perspective that the world is affected by sin, and death has entered the world, and wickedness and evil. And we are all to some degree affected by that wickedness and the cursed nature of this earth. It's just fallen. And so we will experience it in many different ways. And so acknowledging, and then here's the word, is accepting, having acceptance that I live in this fallen world. However, though I do walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil. The Lord is with me. And so somebody shared this this quote with me, and it was, our vision on the mountain is our comfort in the valley. And it's based on Psalm 23. And so when we're on top of the mountain, we're just feeling that closeness with the Lord, we're trusting him. We have to take that and also apply it to those really difficult times. It's not really trust if we're only trusting him with the good, easy things. It's trust when we're trusting him with the most difficult things in our lives. Those deepest, darkest fears where we go, oh, this is the one thing that if it happens, I really don't want that to happen. And in this sense, comfort can become an idol because, and this is going to make me wildly unpopular. So, but that's all right.
That's a good day to be unpopular, my friend.
Yes. So in our culture, in Western civilization, the second we feel discomfort, we are popping Tylenol and Motrin, which is great. When I have a migraine, I thank the Lord that I can take something for that, okay? We have so many amazing things that we can be grateful for. However, we have come to a point where we are so comfortable all of the time that we have a really difficult time. We have a low threshold for pain and discomfort. Our threshold has become low and we've become less resilient because of it. And so it's less common for people to suffer through things. It's less common for people to feel like they have the strength in the Lord to do things. And so for me, one quote by Elizabeth Elliot that I love is, the secret of joy in me is Christ, not me in another set of circumstances, right? So the idea that I can only trust the Lord, I can only be happy and not anxious is when life is going exactly how I would want it to be or how I would control it in that scenario. But when it comes to looking at anxiety and trust and looking at the idol of comfort, dealing with anxiety is uncomfortable. It has to be. We have to work through all of these things.
That's so
right?
scary to say to some people. Yeah.
Exactly. Being afraid of the dark will never get better if you always leave the light on.
Yeah.
It just won't. I mean, you're going to make it easier for you to get through that scenario in that moment. Oh, I slept well because you had the light on, but you're never addressing that fear. And so when we deal with fear and exposing ourselves to it in a slow, controlled way, right, most of the time, we're teaching our brains, we're teaching ourselves, like, I'm surviving this, like, this is survivable. And for me, it was, one, reshaping how I thought of the anxiety. Like, this is my body or my brain trying to protect myself.
Mm-hmm.
And then understanding I have to be honest before the Lord with trust and anxiety. And what does it look like to trust even in the dark times? And just really trying to get to a place of understanding with how comfort could become an idol in my life, and it was for a very long time. I felt entitled to, why me? Why should I be uncomfortable? When through the Bible, a huge theme of suffering is there, and how our suffering makes us more like Christ. It makes us more Christ-like, because we learn, first of all, in 2 Corinthians 1:4, we're reading about how the Lord comforts us in our trouble so that we can comfort one another. Like there's something there about being able to look at other people in their eyes and say, you are going to make it. Like, because the Lord is with you. Like, you are not doomed to this prison of fear forever. And this is probably what I've seen in my own experience. There's really two groups of people that I've seen when you talk about trauma. So take people of a similar backstory. There are some people who are stuck like in that mud forever. They really are. They get stuck there and they really believe they can't get out. And then you see some people and you have conversations and you go, wow, I would have never guessed that happened to you. And they're like, yeah, I dealt with it. And the people from group one who are stuck in the mud, they say things like, oh, they're just sweeping it under the rug and they're just not addressing it, which could be the case for some people. But I think that's not fair, because there are people who were stuck, but they faced that anxiety and that fear head on, and they genuinely dealt with it. They have a scar, but they're moving on with their lives and they're doing other things. And
it's not their identity anymore. It's not something they identify with anymore. It reminds me of an addict, somebody who's worked through their addiction.
Right. There's some people you would never guess the things that they've said. I had somebody tell me recently, she said, you don't sound or look like your testimony. Yeah. I'm like, thank you. That's really a compliment, because we really see these two groups of people. And so it's my belief that believing that you're stuck forever is just as unhelpful as people who just ignore it and sweep it under the rug. Like, both of those extremes are very bad. But it's my belief that you can really be unstuck and you can really not sweep it under the rug and truly heal. And that's possible.
Let's dig into that a little bit more. So let's talk about the secular side of therapy and the Christian side of therapy. There's so much to unpack here, because I can sense people listening that might be frustrated, right? Or they agree with you, right? Where they're going to therapy, they're trying to work through it. And I can probably guess that they're like, Ashley, how did you do this? Like, how did you get through it? And a lot of that you've already shared. But let's talk about first, let's start with the Christian side of this. Okay. Because obviously we're Christians. Obviously, it was the missing puzzle piece for you was Christ. Yes. It was the beauty of the Christian worldview. And I say this phrase often, and I got it from Brave New World by Aldous Huxley. It's a world without suffering. And at the end, one of the main characters says, it's Christianity without the tears. What's the point? Right? Like you kind of have to have this understanding of suffering in order to understand why Christ came. And if you take away suffering, all the things. Okay. So you talked about how to suffer well, but it's the Christian worldview that brings meaning and answers to that suffering. But then we have this stigma in the Christian world where some people might gasp at you taking meds. Or there's another element where it's always spiritual, that you're dealing with PTSD, anxiety, whatever it was a demonic attack and wasn't necessarily divorced from your trauma, but you have to have it delivered, right? Like, you have to have the demon delivered. It had nothing to do with like the psychology of your amygdala. You know what I mean? Like, of your brain reacting in a way to try to protect you. So we have the spectrum, okay, of issues within the Christian community when it comes to mental health, and other times we don't. Other times it's beautiful and awesome and delivers and helps fit that puzzle piece in. Along with the psychology comes the spirituality, and it really does help. And that we'll talk more about the secular side because I do think there's some good there, but also their pitfalls. But let's talk about that spiritual side. Can you tell me what you think about it and what some of those pitfalls are? Because you are in that world on some levels, and what we can do to address them.
Sure. And to be very, very honest, I definitely lean more towards the biblical counseling side of this just because of my experience. However, we need to be honest about the pitfalls, like you said. We need to be honest about the unhealthy things that are really hindering people and not helping them. And so, where to even start? Let's talk about everything's a demon, right? That's a good place to start. So, first of all, something that I ask every woman who comes to me and talks about, I have like daily anxiety now, all of a sudden I feel all these things. The first thing I think of is not let's exercise a demon. The first thing I ask them to do is go to your doctor and get a blood panel done. Make sure your thyroid is okay. Make sure you're not anemic. Make sure your vitamins are okay.
You told
and
me to do that.
Come back and be like, oh, my B12 was super low and it was making me shaky, or I need more vitamin D and that was really making me feel super sad. And so there's a very real I don't want to say reality, very real reality. There's a
Physical.
yeah. So the physical state that our body is in with all of those levels directly affects how our brain is functioning. So we have to be aware of that. And so sometimes on the biblical counseling side, there is a tendency to just kind of like pretend that doesn't exist. Not always, but it definitely does, because if everything is spiritual, it doesn't give room to
take responsibility for maybe something you're attributing to. Like, what if you have a bad diet?
Right.
Like, what if you're spending too much time on your phone? What if you're in a toxic relationship?
Right. And so this is where we have tension between biblical counseling side and we have tension between the secular side, because it almost becomes like taking responsibility for how you may be contributing to maybe your negative thought patterns. Okay. So we want to be really careful and delicate, because everybody who goes through trauma, or everyone who's experiencing just fear and anxiety that's debilitating, we want to be careful because they deserve to be heard about their trauma, and they deserve to seek justice for that. If someone needs to be held accountable, we should be doing all of those things, which the biblical counseling side really needs to be more vocal about, right? We need to listen to people. We need to let them seek justice through the authorities if need be. Like, we need to do all these things. However, with the secular side, there tends to be this tension between not really, the tension is the secular side, they don't always want to like let people know that they have any responsibility whatsoever with their reaction to it. So I'm not saying with the trauma itself, right? Like, we're not victim blaming here, but what I'm saying is, like, if something horrible happened to you 15 years ago, and now today you are stuck in these really negative thought patterns and this like really bad things in your lifestyle that are contributing, that's almost never spoken of in my experience. It's always like kind of holds people in a victim state forever, which I think is not helpful. And it doesn't help people take responsibility for how they're responding to the trauma and their healing. So I just have to be careful, because again, I'm not saying that people are responsible for their trauma. It's just how you're responding to it and how we're moving forward, because it's on the biblical counseling side or the spiritual side, sometimes it's just like, pull yourself up by your bootstraps and, suck it up, buttercup, and get out there and deal with it, instead of being like equipping people with practical ways to say, hey, these are going to be things that'll be helpful for you. But on the other side, it's almost like we're putting pacifiers in adults' mouths and saying, I'm so sorry what happened to you. This now forever gives you a pass to be dysfunctional for the rest of your life. And I know that's wildly unpopular, but I think because I've lived it, I know that it's true. And it handicapped me in a sense of being able to fully heal in those aspects.
Yes, that's very, very well said. I think that I haven't actually read this book yet, but it reminds me of Bad Therapy by Abigail Schreier. I haven't read that book, but every time I hear you talk about this, I'm like, man, I need to read this book because there's pitfalls on both sides. And I think that, as Christians, and again, that's kind of like the area that you're in, uh, you can understand that it really is the missing puzzle piece. And I agree with you wholeheartedly that there is an issue within the secular therapy that it's like you go and there's no like solution given. Right. I remember Becket Cook talking about this. He was having an issue before he came to Christ. Becket Cook is a former gay man, and he became Christian and he left the lifestyle completely. But it was a therapy session. It was a secular therapy session that he's like, is this it? Like, is this the end? How do I feel today? How do I feel about that? And there was something that was just lacking in that. It's just like there's a drone of staying in that identity that I think you're right. It might be unpopular because it's a tense topic because people can get triggered over this. And, we don't want to victim shame. We're not trying to make anybody feel bad or anything like that. But this is you talking about your story and how you got through this because it's a very unique thing. Your perspective is unique because you've been through it so intimately. Now, we were talking about this before, like last month, whenever I was like, hey, you should come on and talk about this. I think it was a video you sent me or found it. No, you sent it to me. And I'm going to play it real quick. And then I want to get your thoughts on it because this is kind of what you're talking about with with people trying to deal with real trauma, with real things, and the advice that they're given can sometimes look like this. So here, let's play it real quick.
You got a question for Sylvia?
I have a really bad problem with social anxiety. I can't freak out. I can't.
You're doing pretty good now. But let me tell you where this comes from. You were accused of being a witch in a past life. You were put in a circle and you had to name two people so that supposedly you wouldn't die. Except they didn't tell you that. They just said, tell us two people. You named two people and all three of you were hung. So no wonder you have social anxiety.
Thank you.
Ash, let me know what you think of that.
It's almost unbelievable that happened on national television. Like, that's my first thought. And it just makes me really sad. It's that theme of, imagine, first of all, being told this, like from this girl's perspective, like she's going up here saying, I have this terrible social anxiety, and then being told like, well, it's because you were a witch and you're
just cursed.
Yeah, exactly. I can't imagine that was helpful in any regard. If anything, it's giving her this very obscure excuse to be like this forever. Yes. And this is what is just extremely unhelpful. And in the same way, when we were given these labels and told, first of all, labels are helpful. So we know what we're dealing with, okay? They're very helpful. Knowing, okay, we have this certain set of patterns of behavior and we're going to label it this name, give it this acronym. That's helpful because now we know, okay, why, like what's going on exactly. However, we tend to take these labels, just like we're told we were a cursed witch that was hanged in a past life, and then we're like, and this is why I am the way I am, and this is why I can never not have social anxiety, and this is why I can never not be depressed, and this is why I can never not be happy or trust in the Lord. And it's just like this weird self-limiting like prophecy that we just believe, and then we're never going to be able to escape it because we wholeheartedly believe it and we're being reinforced it. And this is like the problem I had being in a clinical setting. It was like every time we went in, we were talking about the past. That was it. Kind of like, how are you today? However, now let's talk about 10 years ago. Now let's talk about 12 years ago. And you go through it over and over and over and over, and then you leave and you wonder, why am I depressed all the time? It's like, maybe because I'm thinking about the most horrific things that have ever happened to me on a bi-weekly basis. And I'm crying every time, and it's just like, I wonder why I'm not feeling good. But so that clip, it just is so sad for this young woman to hear that basically you have no responsibility over your social anxiety and there's nothing you can do about it. So good luck.
And her answer at the end, thanks. I guess, I think, yeah. So that was a long time ago. By the way, that was Sylvia Brown. She was a very famous, if people are watching and they're like, who is that? That's like trash 90s talk shows. And Sylvia Brown was a regular on a lot of these talk shows. And she was a very famous psychic medium who was incredibly mediocre, if you can't tell. And these are the kinds of things that I think a lot of people still deal with when it comes to dealing with generational curses or, sin that you're just going to have to deal with and live in. Even with a lot of the social movements that we're dealing with today, it's like, well, you're white. Well, you know what? You're just a perpetual racist then. Sorry. It's like because of things that happened in the past, you're now having to live with and you can't clean yourself of them.
Right.
And that leaves a burden that you can't actually do anything about. And so, of course, it's going to leave you, pulling this bag of weight behind you in your mind that you have to deal with. And so, yeah, that's really well said. Now let's pivot into what I'm going to call more practical things. So we talked about a lot of the good things that we wanted to get to: suffering well, secular, spiritual. There's probably more we could say to that. But one thing that I found particularly pivotal in what I was dealing with was you say scary things because you're like, you got to deal with it, Melissa. Like you have to think, where does this come from? Why do you feel this way? And so let's role play for just a second. Say I come to you and say I had a similar past to yours, or maybe peripheral things that happened in my life. And I'm like, Ash, I struggle with anxiety daily. I wake up every day. I don't know how to even take care of my kids. I don't know how to live my life. I can barely shower during the day. What is the first thing that you would tell me?
The first thing I would tell you is something that of comfort and compassion, and say, that's really difficult where you are. Genuinely, I don't want that for you. I think that I would ask you a lot more questions about your lifestyle. I would ask you how taking care of yourself looks like, and getting through those practical things that are responsible to ask people about their health, right? And this is why I always ask them, when's the last time you did get blood work done? How, there was this meme that I saw, and it was like this guy, and it was like he was watching trash, eating trash, and listening to trash, and all these things, and he goes, why do I feel like trash? And sometimes that's really helpful to have another set of eyes look at. And I would ask you, when's the last time you left your house and did something? When's the last time you took a shower and took care of yourself? Like with compassion, what's going on, right? And if you came to me with the things of your past, like I would really dig deep and try to understand in a compassionate way, like, how did we get to here? If this thing happened 20 years ago, 15 years ago, how are we here? And once we get there, when we get to the real root of it, right? Like the fear, the anxiety, like I said, sometimes it's a fear of death. Sometimes it's a distrust in the Lord. We have to, I'll ask you kind of, and I think I've asked you to do this, like we're going to do lots of journaling exercises, and I want you to write out, and this is scary, I want you to go.
It's so scary.
Yeah, I want you to go write out the worst possible case scenario that you're afraid of. And I want you to write it out as long as it takes. Be very detailed with it. Don't just try to be like, and then this bad thing happened. Like, be very specific about what you're afraid of and do that. And then I want you to write out the best possible case scenario. And then nothing bad happened, right? And I want you to talk about that. And then I want you to write something maybe kind of like a mix of both. Maybe some kind of things that you were worried about happened, but maybe some better things happened over here. And when you do that, it forces you to look at what you're truly afraid of, right? And when I ask people to do that, I go, okay, so how much of this, you could take one color highlighter. I want you to highlight all the things that are out of your control, right? Or a different color pen and underline it. Like, what are the things that you are afraid of that are outside of your control? And then I want you to write a separate journal entry about how the things that are in your control you can do to respond to that. So part of anxiety is dealing with the problem of control and understanding, like, there are most things in this life are outside of our control, and there's only things that we can do in our control to respond to it, right? So we can't control how other people act or what they say, but we can control if we want to be near them, right? We can set boundaries and do things like that. So when we are very forthright with ourselves and go, oh, I guess this is actually what I'm afraid of, is this scenario happening? And then trusting the Lord with all those things we highlighted that are outside of our control. We take those to the Lord and say, Lord, I am apparently deathly afraid of X, Y, and Z happening. Please help me with this, right? I don't want to live in fear of this, and I also need to trust you with it. So we take those things that we're afraid of and we pray about them. And then we make a very practical list of what are the ways that we can respond to mitigate this worst case scenario situation from happening, right? And so I think when we look at the things that are in our control, are things that are our responsibility, how our attitude is, how we're reacting, I think it can really be helpful to this. And just to be more specific, I deal with chronic illness. And there was a period in my life where I was just very angry that I had chronic illness. I felt like, this isn't fair. I'm so young. Why is this happening to me? You know, I was in that mindset. And when I did this and I looked at all the things that were outside of my control, I cannot control most of the time when I get a viral illness and get sick and have a really bad autoimmune flare. I can't control that. However, I can control how I'm going to be ready and prepared to deal with that. And so that helps ease my anxiety in a very practical way, showing that, okay, I'm going to give this over to the Lord, and I'm also going to do what I can do to have a good attitude. Because here's the thing. When you're a mother and you have chronic illness and you stay at home with them, it's very easy to be snappy and rude and kind of angry all the time, or anxious, and because I'm not feeling good. And something I learned that was really helpful is like having that joy in all circumstances and having that peace and happiness no matter my circumstances helped lessen my fears and my anxiety, because it showed me that life can still be good when it's not perfect. Life can still be full of peace and joy, even when everything doesn't go my way. And it's really having the acknowledgement of the sinful world we live in and accepting, having so much acceptance for where we are, our bodies, our past, our history. The Lord did not accidentally throw Melissa into her family and me into my family and just was going to see what happens. Like, he knew all of these things. And when we suffer well, Melissa, we do it for the glory of God. And when we don't suffer well, it doesn't bring him glory. And when we don't suffer well, it's such a sad thing, because suffering is, you know what, this is the perfect segue. Suffering is never for nothing. And this is a book that I love by Elizabeth Elliot. And I highly recommend that everyone watching this check it out if this is something that you're interested in. And it has a foreword by Joni Eareckson in it, and it's just very good. So suffering is never for nothing, and believing that, and that's where faith comes in. So
yeah, this really is what it's about. Is here Paul's talking about, you know, the secret of, you know, of everything. It's contentment. Like, what does that mean? You know, and it's what we're talking about, and getting there when your brain isn't functioning right. We can help that. Like, there are actual steps that we can take that have lasting effects. One of them, I remember you were telling me, exposure therapy, like, in a way where it's like, okay, whatever you're afraid of, you have to actually face. You have to face it. And because part of that is spiritual. The other part of it is teaching your brain that this isn't a threat, right? Like that, or that you can, it's like you're trying to calm your mind down. So it's like this synergistic kind of working together spiritually and physically of putting yourself in the situation and teaching your mind it's okay, you know? And so that's always scary, but that was very helpful as well. And so as we close up here, two things I want to mention. So we were talking about, like, we brought up the Sylvia Browne clip. And one thing that I think is very interesting, and this might segue more into talking a little bit more about the secular side, and even spiritual. I'm thinking of like Bethel and Sozo and their Sozo therapy that they do for people, deliverance ministries, like certain ways that we deal with these sorts of things don't work, right? I mean, can you imagine for a second somebody coming up to you, like that girl that has social anxiety, and you're just patting you can't speak like that. You need to speak in the name of the Lord, and you need to speak as if You are brave. I am brave. I am courageous. I am this. I am that. You claim it for yourself. Don't let the devil have a foothold on your mind. And it sounds good. All right. That sounds like, oh man, I'm working myself up. But what would you say to that somebody who's really trying to help? The positive thinking, the affirmations, the speaking the blood, right? But it's also, that's both secular as well, because we have that in secular society, but we also see this in the church. I kind of want to tie this up, this whole conversation, with specifically asking you about this kind of talk in these spaces. What do you think about it?
I think it's just as harmful when we're not honest and genuine, because we know when we're being honest with ourselves. We know when, if I'm sitting here and saying, I am healed, and I know that I'm not healed.
Yes. Yes.
I'm not afraid, but my knees are literally shaking. Like, when we're not authentic before the Lord, we know that, even if in that moment we feel like, we're all empowered or whatever, but it's really not empowering. It's lying when it's not true. It's pretending we're not in the valley of the shadow of death. Just like you said, it is denial. And so it's not helpful. And when we're honest with ourselves about what's actually happening, and we're honest before the Lord there's such a theme. The theme of the Bible is redemption. Like, that's a major theme of the Bible is redemption. And that's something that you miss in secular therapy. There is no redemption there. For the most part, there's coping, right? But when we look at redemption and we look at suffering throughout the Bible, like, we see lots of very honest stories. We see Job and that epic conversation between Job and the Lord. And the Lord's like, where were you when I created the earth? And when we see the honesty, first of all, the Lord, we're not hiding anything from the Lord. We may put on a show for other people and be like, oh, I'm healed and I'm this and that. But the Lord knows the condition of our hearts, and he knows exactly what's going on. So being honest and, just in your prayer life and saying, this is what I'm struggling with. But at the same time, having faith that these things are redeemable. They're possible to be redeemed. And that's the missing piece that was there for me, was that redemption is possible, and believing that. Because when we're stuck in a place where we're constantly digging in that open wound and going, why is it not healing? I'm just digging in it and living perpetually in the past forever. It is such a terrible thing. The people who I know that are stuck forever, they can't get over the past. And sometimes, not all the time, sometimes it makes them very bitter, and it makes them very difficult to be around, because now I'm constantly in the past forever. And they don't understand what it means to heal and move on from things, and not let your past dictate every single thing about how your day is going to go. And that's why I think there's so much wisdom in Jesus talking about, like, we don't worry about tomorrow. It's got enough trouble of its own that it's going to have, right? And it's understanding that today is all that we have. And on our deathbeds, there's going to be many people who regret worrying their life away and being stuck in the past, being unforgiving, or whatever the case may be, is being in this place where they miss their entire lives. They missed the opportunity of healing and seeing what they could do for the Lord to bring him glory, and what redemption looked like. And I don't want that for anyone watching this video. And so this conversation is just really important. There was another book I wanted to bring up when we're talking about death. It's this one here. It's called Death is a Doorway by Braxton Hunter. He's from Trinity Radio.
Yeah.
This book is fantastic. I highly recommend it. For anyone who has a fear of death, even if you say, I don't fear death, just buy the book and read it. It's really good. It helps give a really good perspective on these things, but understanding that the worst thing that could happen, really, in any scenario, is that we die. But if we're Christians, as Paul says, it's the best thing that could happen, because we get to be with the Lord. And so understand that this life and the practical things in this life that help us suffer well is clinging to the promises of God. Not in this fake way, not in this fake, hyper charismatic way of, just I'm declaring it. But grieving things before the Lord is also something we see. Mourning things. If there's something that tragic that happened to you, take time to grieve and mourn that before the Lord. Truly grieve it. Don't rush that. Grieve it before the Lord. Feel all those feelings, because when we take the time to address things properly, we can kind of put it away then. And we feel like we've dealt with it. And dealing with things takes time. However, there is a point where we do shut the lid on that box and go, okay, I dealt with that. And now I have the rest of my life and I have other things in my life to look forward to. So we want to be honest, and honesty when suffering and grieving and mourning is integral to suffering well.
Yeah. Something else interesting. We'll wrap it up with this, but because, this is what we wanted to end on, is suffering well. But it's also very interesting that suffering also exposes your heart. I've realized 2020, when COVID happened, it was as if there was this line in the sand. That was just COVID. Imagine if like actual persecution came. And we saw a lot of people fall away from the faith. We saw a lot of people go progressive. And there's an exposure with suffering. Like, where are you at? And I think of, the prosperity teachers. I think of, the comfort of the American church, and who you are and how you feel about the Lord has a lot to do with suffering. I always say it's the things that atheists are made out of, but it's also the thing that, apostates can be made out of, progressive Christians, people who have left the faith. Why? Well, because something bad happened to me. Yep. There was no leaning into the Lord. There was always the promise of, this is the danger of the prosperity gospel, and I did everything right. Why did this happen? Is there anything that you want to leave my audience with in this conversation?
Yes, a couple of thoughts, what you were just speaking about. When we think of the refiner's fire, that's not comfortable. When we think of, there's a very popular image that's in Christian circles on the internet, and it's like an olive being pressed really hard, and the oil coming out of it, and it says, suffering proves like what you're made of, and pressure proves what you're made of. And our suffering can be a sacrifice to the Lord. It can be an acceptable thing of, in a sense of like, our suffering can glorify him, and we can suffer well for his glory, and we can show the world. It's a testimony. When you suffer well, it's a testimony to the world about our God. And it shows that, this world, it really is terrible a lot of the times, but the Lord is still with me, and that joy cannot be taken from me. And many times in church history, we see people suffering through persecution, being beheaded, being thrown to lions, and it converts other people around them. They're like, wow, that peace they had in that suffering was such a testimony. And I have a couple quotes written on the inside of my Bible, and one of them is, the leg does not feel the chain when the mind is in heaven. And that's by Tertullian. And another one is by Charles Spurgeon. And it says, when grief presses you to the dust, worship there. And the point is that the world is watching how we suffer. Our family is watching. Our unbelieving family is watching. The Lord is watching all things. And this life is going to be over very, very soon. Our life is but a vapor, and this is all going to be over. And when you have that perspective, when you have your mind on Christ and your mind in heaven, things become more bearable when you have that perspective. And for me, dealing with chronic illness, dealing with the past history of trauma, like the problem with a lot of secular things is they put this label on you, and they say it's a permanent label that you can never take off. And that's the problem with it. And so I today don't believe I meet any criteria for PTSD. Like when they diagnose you, they go through this list of criteria. So I was diagnosed with it as a teenager, but that's not something that even like comes to my mind anymore about affecting my life. Mm-hmm. And so the point of all of this is to say that there is practical things that we can do. There are prayers we can pray. There are things that we need to be honest with ourselves about with the difficulties of this life. And when we do that, we can really come to a place where we help other people and give them hope. We can give other Christians hope. And we show the unbelieving world the power of our God, that they are missing this whole concept of redemption. And when we show our lives redeemed because the Lord's doing it, they see that redemption is possible and it's genuine. So we're not out here, declaring things in a very, fake way. But when people see us struggling and coming through it and going, she's not stuck. That's interesting.
Yeah.
Our life is a testimony to the world. And I think it is just one of the best things we can do is suffer well.
Yeah. Yeah. So, it's funny. One thing about this that I was thinking of as you were talking is like the tough love of these kinds of conversations. Mm-hmm. Speaking of taking people out of their comfort zone, one thing that can happen is somebody who's been through a lot, right? Like has a past similar to yours, maybe even worse. And it's an excuse for their bad behavior. You know what? I had this happen to me. This is how I am. I struggle with this. Deal with it. Yeah, I yelled at you. Yeah, I kind of went off on you. Yeah, I'm really insecure. Yeah, I kind of perpetually lie. Or yeah, I can be incredibly over emotional about everything and super sensitive or whatever, but it's because of my trauma.
Right.
And so there is no ownership. It's an excuse for their bad behavior. It's their excuse to abuse people, other people. And again, this is tough love because I don't want to, it's not that I'm not trying to hurt other people's feelings, but think of the people that have to deal with that. I think of criminals. Okay, let me tell you, this is kind of, I grew up with my father was a lieutenant cop. And I like true crime. Like me and Jay Warner Wallace were buds, right? And there's a joke that I would have is that criminals never do anything. The first thing they always say is, I didn't do anything. Mm-hmm. Why are you arresting me? Well, sir, you just ran this lady off the road, or you're drunk right now and driving, and your child's in the back, right? Mm-hmm. I didn't do anything. Why are you right? Okay. I almost want to make another YouTube channel just called I Didn't Do Anything. That would be the name of the channel. And all it would be is police cams of criminals who are clearly guilty, but in their mind, they didn't do anything. Don't be that person. This is what trauma can do, is that it shifts your image of reality and takes responsibility off of us. And the core of what Ash is saying, and this is why I respect you so much, is you could have gone there. Mm-hmm. You could have so easily have gone down the road of, this is the way I am. I'm going to treat you the way I treat you. I'm going to make this my identity and the excuse for all of my bad behavior because I had a very traumatic past. You didn't do that. And you went the hard road. You went the narrow road. And so take from that what you will, but do you have anything to add to this conversation? Because that's something that's, I think that's something that might be hard to hear, but I think that people need to hear some tough love.
Absolutely. I love how you phrase it as tough love, because it's not to put anybody down, but it's the reality of healing is tough work. And life is going to be hard if you choose to stay victimized for the rest of your life. But I say this to many women is like, I drive past strip clubs and a majority of those women have very similar stories to me. And lots of them are addicted to street drugs or prescription drugs. And I've spoken to them and we have very similar stories. And one of them has said to me kind of along the lines of like, well, I'm glad you got better, but I can't. Right. And so kind of like those two groups of people we're talking about, some people get stuck forever and they will resent people who are not stuck and think that you're faking it or whatever. But the idea of choosing at some point, healing is a choice for you as far as pursuing it. I'm not saying you heal yourself, but at some point when the pretext of everything in your life is, oh, I have all of these triggers and everyone has to watch out for me and all of these things, like we have to be really careful with that. There's some people that are just, it's almost impossible to maintain long-term relationships with because there's so many things that they will not let go of or will not choose to heal from at some point that it becomes like, I can't even have any conversation with you now because of this. And here's the thing is like, when we believe that for ourselves, we are believing that redemption is not possible and we're stuck here and we have to have everyone else live by our rules. And that's just not how reality works. Like, this is why I said to you earlier, Melissa, there are so many people. We can look at older generations, for example, that I'll speak to them and they'll tell me the most horrific stories you've ever heard. And I'm like, I would have never known that about you. And they said, yeah, well, it took me a long time. It took me 20 years to deal with it or 10 years, but I've moved on. And it's that theme of resilience that I think we're missing. And it can seem hurtful to people, but moving on at a certain point is a choice that we make. And I think that when we're not digging and living in the past constantly, I think that the Lord can really heal that within us, and that healing is something that we have to surrender to the Lord and understand. Like, if you cannot maintain relationships for a very long time, right? If there's a theme in your life of like, everyone is this, but they're all the problem except for me. Sometimes we're the common denominator, and that's not to shame people who have trauma, because trauma makes your life harder. It just does. But it doesn't, it's not a death sentence. And I'm here to tell you from experience, I've been there. And I'm at a place where I have closed up that wound, and I'm not bleeding all over everybody else all of the time anymore, right? Initially, when the trauma happened, I did for a long time, and that's to be expected because we're trying to address it and figure out what's going on. But my goal in life is to be a help to people and to be an inspiration to them, and not to be the person who everyone's like, oh my gosh, I got to walk on eggshells around this person, because you never know what's going to happen. And trauma gives, it can excuse very bad behavior. And that's what I was saying earlier in this conversation is there are so many people who have gone through similar things that have come out the other side, and we have to believe that that's possible for us as well. And that's what I hope that this conversation conveys, very hopefully gracefully, but like you said, a little bit of tough love, because these are things we don't hear, especially today. Like, this is very politically incorrect. It's very politically incorrect.
Very.
But we're interested in the things that are going to practically help people get better in a genuine way. We're not sitting here, I'm not telling you, okay, now 5 times a night, I want you to say, I am healed, I am not afraid. All these affirmations, like, that's not what we're telling you. I'm also not telling you, I want you to journal about what the bad thing that happened to you every night for the rest of your life. And those are the extremes we're looking at, Melissa. And these are the things I want us to reject. And I want us to believe in the story of the Bible of redemption, the theme in the Bible that we see, redemption and reconciliation and healing, because that's what our God does. And so we have to believe and have faith that that can happen for us if we're honest about it and we pursue before the Lord what it means to suffer well and what it means to be healed by God.
Yeah. Oh, all of that. All of that. So good. And yeah, I want to thank you for 2 things. Number 1, coming on and talking about all of this, because I know this is a very vulnerable thing for you, but also being that person to me. You pushed me in a very good way where I'm like, Ash, tell me the hard stuff. Give it to me. Like, I really want to deal with this. I want to get through this. You were that person for me. You told me all the things that I sometimes did not want to hear. And there were times where you're like, don't do this, Melissa. Like, don't not go. Don't not do this, because then your anxiety's won, kind of thing. And I needed that. I wouldn't be here had I not accepted that tough love. And so I ask this question with that frame of mind, with those listening. Maybe that might have been hard to hear, but I'm telling you, your life gets so much better when you really, really deal with it and deal with it head on. So this was so good. I'm so glad I had you on today. Thank you so much for coming on today and speaking with me about this topic.
Thank you for having me, Melissa. I think that this is such a relatable thing for so many people, and I just really pray that the Lord uses it to bless people and give them something to think about.
Amen to that.